Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and Diablo 4. Many players are now reaching the endgame, which is World Tier 4 and beyond of course, and they're starting to push their Nightmare Dungeon tiers, reaching towards Tier 100 hopefully, and facing the new target bosses and so on. It seems a lot of people are having a harder time than they expected though, taking more damage than they're simply used to in the same content. It's been actually all over the Diablo 4 subreddit the last few days, and there was one specific very popular post explaining how they overcame Vashan, who was basically crushing them at level 73. Why is this happening? Why are people taking so much damage unexpectedly? Well, it's because in Season 2, they changed resistances. And not just elemental, but also physical, because armour no longer works in the same way either. Now our element resistances really matter for surviving in World Tier 4. And your armor matters a lot too, despite it actually being, weaker and affecting less in this season. There's two sides to this though. We have our physical damage reduction in the form of our armor stat, which as you can see, reduces my physical damage taken by enemies of equal level by 63%. And then if you click your stats and materials page, what you can open up and see here is your resistances, the 5 elemental resistances that you currently have, and what are your current numbers. In my case, I've got 70% on the shadow and fire resistance, and just over 50 on the lightning, cold and poison. This is highlighted in green because this is actually the cap. You can't get over 70% other than using elixirs. So there's a bunch of things to consider. Today I'm going to cover how the new system works, the numbers you're going to need to know, what to aim for going forward, and hopefully this video makes it all a lot simpler if you are unsure or just unaware. Let's start with an important fact. By entering the endgame and World Tier 4, you will quite literally tank a minus 50% penalty to all element resistances by simply being in this mode. And it's not just World Tier 4. In Nightmare, you get a 25% penalty. The moment you enter World Tier 4 then, things are going to start hitting you really hard suddenly compared to how hard they were hitting you before. It's important that we resolve this issue if you want to survive, and that's seemingly the cause of a lot of the issues for people. Let's take a look at a World Tier 4 version of a target boss, and we can see how hard I'm being hit by it while I don't have any resistances at the cap, and just in general a lot of it reduced. But as soon as I equip some gear that actually provides me with a lot of resistance, both physical from armor and elemental from the actual element resistances, I am greatly reducing how much damage I'm taking. It makes fights much more manageable. Let's start with elemental resistances and how we can reach these caps that we want to have. One important thing to know is that a lot of your resistances can and should come from your jewelry, your amulet, and your 2 rings. Items have inherent stats and affixes on them, right? And with jewelry, you can see that we have resistance to all elements just inherently attached to all rings. On the amulet, we get even more, triple the amount of resistance to all elements as its inherent stat. If we head to a jeweler and go to upgrade these, you can see what I'm actually getting. And we can see at the top those inherent stats are actually going up, nearly a full % more in resistance to all elements and shadow resistance. So by upgrading this ring to its full capacity and the other ring, I'll get an extra 2% to all resistances just flat out. And this is the best way to build a baseline of your resistances. It's through your jewelry and upgrading them. I'm now currently getting 11.3 resistance to all elements on this ring and 11.4 resistance to all elements on the other. Why am I getting more resistance on one ring compared to the other, even if it's super slight? That is because of the item power level of the equipment. So yeah, it's obviously really important to have your jewelry at high eye level and upgrade it. Therefore, your goal is to have jewelry of 865 eye level or higher as a bare minimum long term. The reason for that is that the scaling on the resistance to all elements stops going up after you reach a base level of 865. Now, there are more ways to increase our element resistance than just your jewelry, of course. For example, one of the main 4 stats, intelligence. This increases your resistances to all elements. And with 786 intelligence, I'm getting just shy 20% resistance to all elements. With 500 intelligence, you should be getting 10% though. And that's a lot more attainable for all of us really, because as you go through your Paragon, you should be picking up lots of points in different things, and as you go, you'll pick up things that aren't your main stat, like strength for me, or dexterity or wisdom. You do get a lot from the Paragon in terms of these main stats, even if it's not the main stat for your class. Plus there's also going to be gear affixes like all stats, and that'll give you some intelligence too, whatever build you're running. So from your jewelry and from your base stats of intelligence, you've got a good amount of different resistances. But as you can see, we need to push towards at least least 50%, ideally 70% in all of them, or at very least the content you're going to do. Let's take Duriel, one of the main bosses that most of us will farm. The reason that he's so important is that he's a key prime source for farming for uber uniques, which we all want. They're ridiculously good. So if we want uber uniques, we've got to fight Duriel, and Duriel's main source of damage is poison and physical, so we need to reduce that specifically as much as we can. So while fighting Duriel, you want a minimum of 70% poison resistance. There are other ways to increase your resistances then. For example, you can gem in your jewelry. I like diamonds because these provide resistance to all elements, and I have them in all of my 3 slots here. That gives me an extra 15%. Another consistent way to really get some resistances is through your defensive gear. So you could find this on your helmet, chest, legs, or boots, and you can see I have one on my boots. 47.6% for fire resistance on one single affix on one item. That is a massive amount. The problem here is that it's only for one resistance, obviously. But it gets me to that 70% easily. Ideally, I would have this in poison because Duriel is just the most important thing, and then I would be at that cap all the time. Out of your options, I would suggest that you find some specific resistances on your boots only. The boots are great because all I really want here is movement speed and movement speed after killing an elite, and then maybe a relevant skill that I've leveled, like corpse tendrils for me in this case. But that leaves me with one slot for a nice target resistance to really juice up. I wouldn't really recommend it on your legs, chest, or helmet because there's other things here that are so important, like max life, raw armor, damage reduction options that you can't get on your boots, whereas you can get resistances there, so it just makes sense. As I alluded to earlier, another way to get more resistances is found in your Paragon board. In fact, there is a load of them here that we would previously kind of ignore because they weren't relevant in Season 1 or pre-season. Now they're really important. In fact, if you take a look at your starting board, on the left side here, the Resilience node here, 6% resistance to all elements right there, and with the magic nodes, an extra 1.5, another 1.5, that's 3% right there. Also around here is maximum life, 2%, which is also one of the most important defensive things you can get. So it's more important than ever to pick up nodes like this that provide resistances, ideally to all elements, when you're going for your Paragon. So if there's one that you can get that's not too out of the way, you can afford it, then maybe it's worth it, especially as you're entering, World Tier 4 and working your way through there initially to get the resistances that you're lacking while you're gearing up. Finally, another way to get big resistances is through elixirs. This weak one, the worst of the sort, increases your poison resistance by 10%. And as you can see, there's other kinds, lightning resistance, fire resistance, or whatever you need, and you can just go to an alchemist, pick the craft elixirs tab, and have a look. But those are the weakest ones. At the top, you have the strongest ones. These provide 30% of the relevant resistance that you need, which is obviously major. What's interesting is in the patch notes, apparently these elixirs can bypass the cap of 70%. Specifically, they said resistance boosting elixirs now also increase the player's maximum resistance value. The value is capped at 70%, but maximum resistance can be increased by various sources like elixirs, but cannot exceed 85%. So there's no reason for me to make a 30% shadow elixir because I'm already at 70%, so that would be 15% wasted. I could instead make a medium one for 15%, which would give me the exact amount to reach the true cap of 85%. In the end, my advice is that you have 50% resistance in everything and have a minimum of 70% against specific stuff that you're planning on doing, like Duriel or harder content in the end game. We can push it to 85% if we really want to, which could be worth it for like Uber Lilith or tier 100s and so on. However, I did say at the start that there's two sides to this coin, and the other side is still armor. Armor might not be what it used to be with the new resistances, but it's still important. It provides physical damage reduction. And the majority of the damage we take is still physical. At a minimum, I would recommend a functional armor of 10,000 or more. You can see that I have 7,200, but the reality is that as I'm fighting, my disobedience kicks in, and that provides up to 66% more armor off of my current max, which should push me over 12,000 just barely when it's fully stacked. If you're doing tier 100s, you're going to want over 13,000 though, so I actually need more armor for that content if I want the 85% reduction that's sort of the cap of this. Obviously, you find armor on your defensive gear, like your chest piece, helmet, legs, whatever. The higher item power you have, the more base armor it comes with. But it's very important to have at least 2 total armor affixes. As you can see, we have 20% extra total armor here on one piece. That could be up to 30% on this roll. I also have more on my legs, so right now I'm getting over 40% extra armor, so I would strongly recommend you find total armor on your legs, chest, and helmet if you can. Why do we need over 13,000 in the context of a tier 100? Well, if we look at the D4 armor calculator spreadsheet, there's a target of 85% damage reduction against physical damage that you're looking for, sort of a cap. Now against level 51 enemies, you get the 85% damage reduction cap with as little armor as 5,413, but against tier 100 level enemies, which is level 154, you're going to need 13,441 armor for the 85% reduction. My suggestion of at least 10k armor protects you of 85% damage reduction against roughly level 110-ish enemies, so around tier 50s. Anything below that is going to be completely fine. So our long-term aim is to have over 13,000, perhaps while disobedience is running, if we're going to be doing tier 100s. If we look at my current situation, we have the 7,288 base. We can push that to 12,000 with our disobedience currently active, but it's clear that I'm going to need more if I'm looking to do tier 100s and have proper protection. The reason I don't have enough right now is that I don't have 925 armor pieces that would provide me with more armor, and I'm missing a total armor affix on my helmet. In terms of my resistances, I am lacking on lightning, cold, and poison. The one that really matters here is poison for duriel, so I could do with re-rolling this fire resistance to poison resistance or finding a new pair of boots with better resistance options on them. Overall, I'm obviously in a nice place with my current gear, but I could use a little bit more armor and a little bit more specific resistances. But I have more than enough to survive the endgame and pretty much everything, only really needing to iron things out as I go for Uber Liliths and tier 100s. I hope this overview of our new armor and resistance systems has helped you. The information can be a bit dense and confusing pretty quick, so I do hope this cleared things up. Remember, depending on your class, you'll have a harder or even easier time with, say, element resistances or just raw armor. Sorcerers, for example, are doing great. They get loads of element resistances inherently, so they need to think about armor more than element resistances by comparison. If you guys have any extra information or tips or advice for players in this regard, then be sure to drop it in the comments. Maybe you'll help someone. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.